From JBS Studios in Greater New York, this is the JBS News Update with Teisha Bader.
I'm Micah Halpern, sitting in for Teisha Bader, here with the JBS News Update for Monday, March 5th, 2018. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office for a meeting and a working lunch. Netanyahu is in the States for a 5-day trip, which began on Sunday morning and includes an address at the AIPAC Policy Conference. The President and the Prime Minister are on very good terms. As we are taping this broadcast, the two are meeting. The schedule does not include a press conference. But who knows? These are both spontaneous men. They certainly discussed 5 issues: Iran, Syria, U.S. peace plan for the Palestinians, U.S. embassy move, and their respective internal obstacles. And they may have also discussed Israeli settlements. Prime Minister Netanyahu will most certainly invite President Trump to return to Jerusalem to open the U.S. embassy and to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. Guatemala will return their embassy to Jerusalem. President Jimmy Morales made the announcement Sunday at the AIPAC Policy Conference in Washington. His remarks were greeted with a huge applause. Quote, "As a sovereign decision, we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel," Morales said. "In May of this year, we will celebrate Israel's 70th anniversary, and under my instructions, 2 days after the United States moves its embassy, Guatemala will return and permanently move its embassy to Jerusalem." Putin gave his State of the Union address last week. The speech was filled with pride and power. It is the eve of an election campaign for Putin, and he will most certainly win another 6-year term. During his speech, Putin claimed that despite the U.S., Russia is winning the arms race. He said, "I want to tell all those who have fueled the arms race over the last 15 years, sought to win unilateral advantages over Russia, introduced unlawful sanctions aimed to contain our country's development. All what you wanted to impede with your policies have already happened. You have failed to contain Russia." Putin also announced that Russia now has a nuclear-powered underwater drone and a hypersonic missile. This hypersonic nuclear-powered missile can travel Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound. It has practically unlimited range. He said, "No one in the world has anything like it. It may appear someday, but by that time, we will develop something new." Sounding much like a cartoon character, he said, "No one has listened to us. You will listen to us now." Finally, Putin asserted that Russian weapons will preserve world peace when he said, "We aren't threatening anyone. We aren't going to attack anyone. We aren't going to take anything from anyone. The growing Russian military might will guarantee global peace." A London paper, Ashaq al-Assad, described in detail the U.S. plan to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The paper cites unnamed French diplomats as its source. The details are no surprise. Arab leaders have been looped in and seem not to be too negative. That is a huge vote of support. The main points published suggest: 1. East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. 2. No right of return for Palestinian families. 3. Financial compensation for families. 4. $40 billion in building infrastructure. 5. Limited sovereignty, which includes expanded governing responsibilities in areas A and B. 6. The Jordan Valley will remain under Israeli control, and the large settlement blocks will remain in place. The smaller settlements will be relocated into the larger settlement blocks. 7. Israel will control the borders. Egypt will control its border with Gaza, which abuts their border. And interestingly, and this was very interesting, it was French diplomats that leaked the U.S. plan to London-based Popular Arab paper. Why wasn't it a U.S. or a Palestinian diplomat? Why an Arab paper and not the New York Times or the Washington Post? In Arabic, Ashaq al-Assad means the Middle East. It's owned by a private company, but it is actually owned by a royal Saudi family. The Saudi family has a stake in this deal. The U.S. deal is very similar to the Saudi peace plan. The Mississippi legislature is in the process of authorizing the state treasury to invest in Israeli bonds. The House passed the Senate Bill 2051 on Wednesday by a vote of 118 to 2. If enacted, the law will allow the state to use excess general funds to invest in bonds issued by Israel. The bill says these investments must be made in U.S. currency and are capped at $20 million. Mississippi State Treasury Chief of Staff Michelle Williams explained that the Treasury invests most of its excess funds into state banks, then into U.S. Treasury. This bill will give the Treasury another option for investment, one that Williams says is safe, but with a higher rate of return. The bill heads back to the Senate for debate and a vote. The sole candidate running against Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in this month's March 26th-28th national election attempted to organize a rally in Egypt, but no one showed up. About a dozen workers from the campaign of Mustafa Musa carried posters of him in downtown Cairo on Sunday, stopping well short of the end of their planned march. At least twice as many photographers and cameramen from state and private media documented the march. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is certainly going to win the re-election March 26th to 28th, after a string of would-be contenders either withdrew under pressure or were arrested. Musa, the only alternative candidate on the ballot, is a little-known politician who actually supported el-Sisi in the previous election. Musa did not attend the very march that he organized and has largely avoided any media coverage. And now for a look at tonight's programming on JBS. At 7, it's The Wisdom of Dr. Ruth Westheimer. At 7:30, Anita Diamant discusses her book, The Boston Girl, and answers questions about the writing process, where she finds her inspiration and her thoughts about modern culture. At 8, author Tova Mervis discusses her memoir, The Book of Separation, about her divorce and her decision to leave the Orthodox community in which she was raised, with Tablet magazine columnist Marjorie Ingal from the Center for Jewish History in New York City. At 9, Mark Golub sits down with Felix Posen, James Young, and Deborah Dash Moore on L'chaim. At 10, author Amos Oz, architect Daniel Lipskin, and others discuss Jewish culture at the 92nd Street Y. And coming up right after this broadcast at 6:30, it's One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. I'm Micah Halpern, and this is today's news update from JBS.